Hey there, it's Shauna. I hope you're doing great. In this video, I'll share with you how to use Mercury retrograde to your advantage. In particular, I'll focus on the Mercury retrograde that's happening from August through September 2017. But of course, many of these themes we can apply to any Mercury retrograde period. So there's two different ways that we can look at this, a Mercury retrograde period is. We can look at it in a general way by the sign and by the dates when things are happening. And then we can also look at it in a personal way where you look at how Mercury retrograde is working in your personal birth chart based on your planets and your houses. And so I'm going to share with you how to do it both ways. I will focus more on the general because this is a general video, but that being said, I have several dates and degrees and things that I'll share with you so that you can apply this to your personal birth chart if you wish to do so at some point in time. So a few basic dates. So the points when Mercury goes retrograde, which is first, when Mercury turns direct, those are the most pivotal points. And so those are days that I want you to pay attention to. So even though during this whole period of Mercury retrograde, it's a time of review, it's a time of reflection, contemplation, and it's really this vibe of retooling things. And so I'll go more into that more in depth in a moment, but I really want you to pay attention to the dates that I give you for when Mercury stations retrograde, when it turns direct, and then the last one that's also important is when Mercury and the Sun conjunct, when they come together at the same exact degree. And these are important because, not because necessarily something might happen, although it could, but it's more like there's a potential for a light bulb moment. There's a potential for an aha where you're like, oh, like I really understand what's happening. And so the more that you pay attention on these days, the more that you can understand what this period is really calling for you. What it's asking of you, because it's never, like, the astrology doesn't work where it doesn't cause things to happen to you. It's not a causal kind of practice. It's more of a practice of correlation and reflection and looking at what's happening within the planets to try and decode on what's happening within our spiritual evolution. So all that being said, Mercury stations retrograde on Saturday, August 12th. At 6:01 p.m. Pacific time, and that happens to be Sunday the 13th at 1:01 a.m. Universal time, and also on Sunday in Australia the 13th at 11:01 a.m. Australian Eastern time. And so these days, you know, depending on where you are in the world, the 12th to 13th, that is when Mercury will station, when it will start to move backward in degrees. So it's going to station retrograde at 12 degrees of Virgo. And so the sign is significant because Virgo, we look at the sign of like what kind of things may come up for review during the Mercury retrograde period. And so this is like a quintessential Mercury retrograde because it's in the sign of Virgo. Mercury is ruled by Virgo, and Virgo is about improvement at the very basic level. It's about making something better, and it's about doing that in a way where we take things apart, we kind of like dissect things and then discern what works, what doesn't, where something needs to be fiddled with or fixed in some way, and then things are put back together. So that's kind of like the process. It's like if your car breaks down or you have like a clock or a piece of machinery, typically what happens is we'll pull it apart and then figure out what little piece it is that malfunctioned, and then once we find that, we can replace it or do whatever we need to do and then put everything back together. The personal layer of this is where you have Virgo in your birth chart. So which house Virgo rules in your birth chart. We all have Virgo somewhere, and then if you have any planets in Virgo, this will be influential for you as well. And so I'll write an article about this going house by house and sign by sign. It would make this video way too long, so I'll have a link for that below if you're interested. But what I want you to know, regardless if you don't know about your birth chart or anything, this is a time of reviewing and pulling something apart to figure out what is not working. And so I would focus this in your life on something that maybe you've been having a challenge with, or if it feels like there's something that's up for review. So that is the first date. So August 12th, August 13th. The other part of this is that Mercury will continue back so far that it actually goes back into the sign of Leo. And so before it does that, though, the Sun and Mercury will conjunct, they'll come together. And so this is an important point too, because it's where the Sun, which is the soul and the ego and the spiritual identity, comes together with Mercury, which is the mind. And so when there's a union of these, there can be like this breakthrough awakening, like, oh, like now I get it kind of thing. So this happens on August 26th. So this is when Mercury is still going retrograde. It's still in the sign of Virgo. So it happens at 4 degrees of Virgo. August 26th, which is a Saturday at 1:43 p.m. Pacific time, 8:43 p.m. Universal Time, and then Australia, same day, August the 26th at 6:43 a.m. Australian Eastern Time. And so this is another day to mark on your calendar, just to notice what things come up, and it's a good time to be open to new awarenesses around what it is that you're retooling or what it is that you're innovating in your life. So that's the second date, that Saturday, August 26th. And this is also an important point to look at your chart, especially if you have any planets or anything, or your rising sign at 4 degrees of Virgo, or even 4 degrees of the other mutable signs, which are Sagittarius, Pisces, and Gemini. So the last piece of this is when Mercury actually stations direct, which is September 5th. So this is Tuesday, September 5th at 4:03 a.m. Pacific time, or 11:03 a.m. Universal Time. And then in Australia, it's still the same day, Tuesday, September 5th at 9:03 p.m. Australian Eastern Time. So this happens at a very special point. It happens at 28 degrees of Leo, and this is a significant point because this is the exact degree where we are having the solar eclipse, the new moon eclipse in Leo. So depending on when you're watching this video, it may have already happened, it may not have. The eclipse happens on August 21st. So the eclipse will happen, and then a few weeks later, Mercury will retrograde at that point. And this is really significant because it's like there's something, like these two events are tied together. The solar eclipse is about resetting something in your life. It's about new things coming in. It's about wiping away the old and then allowing new space for the new. And so the fact that we're like reviewing something in that same area is significant. So that's another day to mark on your calendar. And plus it just marks the day when the internalized review process is coming to a close on September 5th. And so again, of course, if you want to look at this at a more personal level, you can look at what house you have Leo ruling in your birth chart. You can also look at if you have any planets in the sign of Leo. That's also significant for you, and especially if you have any planets or your rising sign at or close to within a few degrees of 28 degrees Leo, or even any of the fixed signs as well, which would be Taurus, Scorpio, and Aquarius. So those are some basic dates for you to work with. Tips that I have for you during this period are to now, before it even happens, to set your intention on what you'd like to review. I mean, we all have something, I don't know about you, but I always have something that I'm like retooling or that I'd like to improve in my life. And so just by setting the intention of maybe 1 or 2 things that you want to work on, that helps to channel that energy. So that's tip number 1 for you, is to really decide on what it is that you want to review during these few weeks. What is it that you want to make better? And then tip number 2 is to allow for that to happen, to allow some free space for things to come up. During Mercury retrograde, it can be a time where there's misunderstandings or snafus, or things don't always go the way that they were planned. So allow for some more space in your schedule, and don't take things too seriously. It will all be okay. I say that to you as much as I say that to myself. And then the third tip is to put this into practice. So leave me a comment below and let me know what it is that you're working on during this Mercury retrograde period. No matter when you're watching this video, let me know what it is that you are improving in your life during this time. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please share it with a friend. And until next time, I'm sending you lots of love. Namaste.